Welcome, guys, to the first ever episode of the NoLimitsNatural Bodybuilding Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lim. If you are a returning subscriber of this channel, thank you so much for being a founding viewer or listener to this podcast. If you are completely new to this channel, this podcast, then welcome. Some background information on myself is that I am a head coach to a competitive natural bodybuilding team, and I'm also a professional natural bodybuilder myself. I have a pro card in the WNBF in open bodybuilding, open classic physique, which I just got last year in my season, as well as men's physique too as well. I thought it would be a great idea for this first ever episode to cover a Q&A, an AMA that I did on Reddit a couple weeks ago, and I actually find myself a lot more on Reddit nowadays than like on YouTube for just general questions, not necessarily about bodybuilding. I still think there's a good amount of information about bodybuilding, specifically like competitive bodybuilding on YouTube. But if you guys have watched YouTube and just been on the platform for as long as I have, you probably remember that like pre-2020 things felt very just authentic, and the content was just very, honest, right? And nowadays I find that, in the past decade, a lot of content on YouTube now has just been heavily like edited and monetized, and it's not really like authentic. A lot of it's just made to produce revenue and drive revenue in some way, shape, or form. And that's the kind of goal within this podcast, is just to keep things honest and real within the natural bodybuilding space. So going into the AMA I did on Reddit, I will post the thread down below into the YouTube video description in case you guys want to see the full thread. I believe this thread got around like 50K views, some good questions asked. It was posted in the subreddit r/workout. We'll be covering a couple of questions here that I think are good to cover for this podcast episode, this first ever episode. I won't cover every single question, just in case you guys do want to see the full thread like I mentioned. So let's get right into it. So first couple of questions here are fairly personal questions for myself. First question here is, how often do you get accused of using gear? And do you actually take it as a compliment, or do you get annoyed that people actually think an in-shape guy is taking PEDs? And, if you asked me this question probably like half a decade ago, when I was younger and more newer into bodybuilding, more in my intermediate phase, I would have definitely said that, I do get annoyed. But now that I'm older, I actually understand that most of that comes from ignorance. And I actually don't get accused as much anymore, because I think that as time progresses, the very niche space and industry of natural bodybuilding is growing, and it's going to continue to grow. It's a very small space still right now, and that's actually one of the goals of this podcast, is to help expand natural bodybuilding. I think people are more aware of what's possible naturally, which is why I don't get accused as much anymore. But back in the day, I definitely used to get a little bit irritated, thinking like, oh, in my head, I wouldn't tell them, but I would just think like, oh, you don't know how much work I put into my physique, how meticulous I am with my food. I'm tracking my food every single day, when you're probably not. Just all of this kind of crap you think about when you're younger, right? Very deflective, very just defensive, right? But now that I'm older, I understand a lot of that's just ignorance, and there's actually not many people are into bodybuilding as much as like you guys are. I'm sure you're watching this podcast for a reason, because you're into the actual bodybuilding side of the fitness space. So most people actually aren't. They don't know how deep these things go, and how much progress you can actually make as a natural. So yes, I used to get annoyed, but now more so I do take it as a compliment. I think it's cool, and if they don't believe me, that's out of my control. I don't really care anymore. And second question over here on Reddit is actually also a gear-related question. And this user asked, do you feel like not using gear has held you back in your career in any way? Do you feel pressure from other bodybuilders, or the community to use gear? And maybe when I was younger, I had a little bit more pressure, and also I felt like kind of like experimental and thinking, maybe I could try gear one day. Actually, after my first ever season, that was with an enhanced coach prepping me like I was enhanced. So if you guys take a look at my prior prep logs from season 1, the difference between my physique from season 1 to season 2 is crazy different, because the prep process for enhanced versus natural, in my opinion, is different unless the actual enhanced coach knows what they're doing with the natural athlete, which, at least in my area in Los Angeles, that's just not the case. Most people here are on gear. I think that outside the US actually has the largest space in terms of natural bodybuilding, but I am side tangenting way too much. You guys will find that I can side tangent a lot, so I'm just going to try to keep on track here. But I have no idea where I was going with that topic. I just lost that train of thought. But going back to the question, natural bodybuilding and enhanced are two different avenues. So my career is solely focused on competing against other naturals. So I personally don't feel like I have any pressure anymore to hop on gear. I remember now where I was going with that train of thought. First ever prep coach was enhanced, and after that prep, I did ask him, like, what do you think about myself, like, potentially hopping on? And that was probably not hopping on, and choosing no was probably the best decision I've ever made. I'm glad he told me, we'll see after, you run this off season, after, a few years in your career, we can talk about it. I'm glad he said that versus, let's just go on. Because if I had hopped on, I've made so much progress after that season, just executing a very good off season like a natural would, right? A lot of like enhanced coaches will prescribe the same, like, I forgot what that programming is called by Hani Ramvad. It's like the FST, I think, and it's the same programming, and it works because, I mean, all of the guys he's coaching is on gear, right? So I mean, just throw anything at anybody, it's gonna work. Anybody on gear, usually it'll work. Usually, right? Not all the time. Everybody has different recovery capacities, but that's where I was going with this. I almost decided to kind of hop on, even though I think it would have been the kind of dumbest decision I've ever made, because I mean the progress I've made from that season to this past season is crazy. You can make so much progress as a natural. So now, even now, I don't feel any pressure. Also because natural bodybuilding and enhanced bodybuilding are two different avenues. I compete only against naturals, so there's no pressure for me to hop on gear at all. And I'm very comfortable in the natural space because, genetics aside, the playing field is leveled realistically. You don't have to worry about, oh, is that guy on like a higher amount of gear? The only thing is genetics, but at the end of the day, like the work, whoever works more typically has the playing field leveled, right? You can't just increase gear, increase your genetics. It's only the work that matters, right? The work you put into your process, your recovery, your headspace, all that good stuff that you guys know. So also natural bodybuilding, I could do this forever. I don't ever have to kind of stop. If I were on gear assisted, I would definitely have to cut my career short. I could essentially do this until like I'm 40, 50, or whenever I just stop wanting to bodybuild, but I don't see that coming anytime soon. Even if I have kids, through that, like I probably will still be bodybuilding, just making it work. And, if you ask me, like 10 years ago when I first started bodybuilding, like 10, 13 years ago, if I thought I would be at my current physique right now, I would definitely say no. And that's the beauty about this sport. You don't know where you're going to be at in 10 years with your physique. And I know for a lot of people that might sound daunting, 10 years, but I promise that time's going to fly by quick. And it's, ensuring that you make the most out of your time within those 10 years. And I certainly have. There's been times within my past 10 years that I haven't been like fully 100%, if I'm being honest, but I've still made a tremendous amount of progress. And you level up as you go. So I can only imagine in the next 10 years, I'm probably going to be in a position where I don't think I'll be in like in that place that, 10 years ago, I didn't think I was going to be here. Another 10 years, I probably won't think, wherever I'm going to be in 10 years is going to be. If that makes sense. Sorry, I'm kind of jumbling my words right now. But it also keeps me very healthy to stay natural. I actually have autoimmune issues. I know some people don't consider eczema an autoimmune issue, but I do, just because whenever I'm experiencing like a little bit of a more hyperactive immune system response, I typically gain like eczema flares. And typically when my immune system is downregulated, like in prep, I don't get eczema at all. Now that I'm out of season and in a much more healthier body fat set point, My immune system is more active, hence why I'll have more flares. If I didn't live this bodybuilding lifestyle, I never got into, just being overall just healthier with my recovery, my nutrition, I probably would still have the eczema I did back in like 2020 when I had it all over my face, my arms. So it keeps me healthy, and at the end of the day, I probably would never be able to hop on gear anyway, just because I don't want to take the risk in terms of not knowing the response I would get in terms of my autoimmune response to the gear. So that's that question. Definitely dove into that much deeper than I had to. And going over a more injury related question right here. This user asked, when I do overhead presses or incline dumbbell presses, something in my elbow always tweaks. Is this due to the weight being too much on my joints and ligaments, or is it more likely a form issue? And I responded with, this is most likely how you're positioning your shoulder or elbow, but definitely could be an issue of how you're executing. This user mentioned like tweaks, like probably like crackles, and it has like a cracking noise, not necessarily pain. But what I'm about to answer right now also applies to having joint pain too as well. This could definitely be an issue of how you're executing. Protect your joints through how fast you shift directions. I know in the space, in the science-based lifting space, people always talk about, control the eccentrics. And yes, it's to gain a little bit more stimulus out of the movement, but it's also to protect your joints. If you're not really controlling eccentrics with a lot of load, you're going to absolutely bombard your joints. Like for a squat, imagine just dive bombing with a ton of load. That's probably why a lot of people have knee pain, right? So eccentrics and controlling tempo is much more than just stimulus. It's also protective too as well. And I also told this user, during your warm-ups, try different positions. Try a more tucked elbow, then try more flared, and see what pronounces the issue a lot more. That's what warm-ups are for in the first place. If you have an existing issue with like a certain body part, joint, that's what your warm-ups are for. Feel out the pattern, feel out what aggravates it the most, see what kind of direction or path exacerbates it the most, and just don't take that path, right? And also, I did mention switching to free weights versus machine and back and forth also helps. A lot of people think machines are just always better when that's just not necessarily the case. Some machines are actually terrible for you based off of your anatomy. Sometimes it'll torque your joints into certain positions that aren't the most optimal. Like hoist, for example, probably one of the most cheapest manufacturers. That's why their padding, the kind of resistance profiles aren't the most optimal. So just if something feels wrong, basically, don't do it, right? It's super simple. Listen to your body, pretty much. And another great question right here was, what's the least amount of volume you've used while still seeing meaningful growth, either overall or on a specific muscle group? So I responded with the fact that you can get away with ridiculously low volume, and your volume is essentially how you execute, right? I think most of us know that at this point. If not, then don't feel bad about that, but it's typically like how you're executing your range, tempo, intensity, connection to that specific body part, and yes, load to a certain extent, but I think that load accumulation is more so systematic, and it can cause a lot of just like systematic nervous system fatigue, I guess you could say, right? But typically, as you get more experience, more skillful with how you lift, that'll naturally just trend your volume down. And if you're somehow just a really good lifter off the bat when you're starting off, we know that, new lifters in the gym don't need as much volume as someone maybe more intermediate, advanced even. But I think that, for example, a new lifter could start off with maybe 5 sets per week, honestly, and grow off of that. But you'll notice that they might need a little bit more volume, assuming that their skill doesn't actually improve within training, right? But as the individual, and it's also because they can handle the volume. A beginner is not going to be let's say you start off squatting quarter on each side, 95 pounds. Right, a beginner is not going to be squatting 3 plates off the bat, right? So the amount of fatigue generated per set isn't going to be extreme, pretty much. And also, they're going to get the kind of newbie gains response So with those two in mind, they can handle low volume or high volume. Both kind of work because they're not going to be producing a ton of like joint stress through high loads. As you typically get to intermediate, that's when people typically, in my opinion, should start backing off their volume with the assumption that they actually start being more skillful within their training instead of just like whipping weights around and what you kind of see in the gym sometimes, just treating lifting more like a skill. And that's when volume, in my opinion, should start to trend down, when you see that you're being more intentful within your training. And this is actually not what the response I was. I'll actually read the actual response. So the more your range, tempo, intensity, and connection are honed in, your weekly volume will trend up naturally. Like maybe not the actual number on paper, but your volume overall equated within the week will naturally trend up because your accumulated work will also move up with better range, better tempo, intensity, connection, etc. So in the cases where I see someone improving the quality of their sets drastically, I actually move their on-paper volume down. So the TLDR behind this, I told him I have one hinge a week pretty much, 2 sets of a squat pattern, probably 8 presses, 8 pulls, and accessory volume I don't really count too much. And I've also seen advanced, like much more advanced lifters than myself do less. You can definitely go under 10 sets per week. And this other user asked, how much do I deadlift? And I responded, I have not deadlifted off the floor in years, but just over 5 plates, but it was sumo, so some of you might say that doesn't count. How long have I been lifting and what's your weekly schedule / split? 14 years. I've been lifting for around 14 years. I started 13, 14 years around there. I started when I was 13. I'm 27 right now. And I'm currently on a push-pull legs off, upper lower off rotation, even though today I am changing the rotation, or this week I've changed the rotation a bit just to lower upper off, lower upper off, just because I'm taking a trip with Alex, my partner, to a rave. I'm not much of a raver myself, but she is. She enjoys raves, and during my last season, I wasn't able to go with her to her first ever EDC, which is a rave, and she wants me to go for this year's just to experience it with her. So I'm all for accompanying her. It's not going to be the most best for recovery. Obviously, the rave is probably the furthest away thing from recovery that you can do. So I'm strategically positioning like lower before the rave so I can still have good quality going into my session, versus if I had a rave day first into a lower session, a leg day, that session would just not be good. I'd rather have a good session, take a little bit more time to recover after, than the other way around, if that makes sense. So how do you determine weight / reps for natural bodybuilding? Does it vary muscle to muscle? And I responded, this is actually a very good question because I understand the consensus. I ran into a person the other day at the gym and he asked me, or he didn't ask me, he actually mentioned that he was doing like bodybuilding reps. He said like, oh, I only do like, I think he said like 10 to 12 or like 8 to 12. And, he was like the bodybuilding reps. And I was like, yeah, you don't necessarily have to do like 8 to 12. You can do like 5 to 7, maybe even 4 if you're really good at being a bodybuilder, right? If you have good connections. And he was like, what, really? And I was like, yeah, like you don't necessarily have to go into that general consensus that you carve the muscle, you do all that. Like that's not a thing. You don't carve the muscle, right? And I responded to this person, not the person at the gym. I responded with, load and reps are just external tools to create an internal stimulus. And same goes for machines, right? You've got to find what rep ranges give you the best connections and that allow you to train to a sufficient proximity to failure. If you're doing something that's 20 rep plus, it's going to be very difficult to train that all the way to failure, right? So I gave an example right here. My calves will respond very well to almost any rep range, probably even like a 6 repper, maybe even like a 4 repper. My back personally right now is one of my weaker areas. And for the most part, right now, currently at least, works better off of higher reps versus lower reps. Lower reps for myself will recruit more biceps. So I'm trying to establish more of a connection right now within training within my back using higher reps. And once I grab that connection and understand how it feels to properly train my back with higher reps, because we know that higher reps, burns more and gives you more of a pump. That helps with establishing connection. Once I have that, I can start trending more towards like a lower rep range and such. And he asked another question to kind of elaborate on that. I guess I'll read it. So he said, when you say these rep ranges, does it mean that if you say your back responds to... Yeah, I'm just not gonna read this question. I'm gonna go over what I responded to this question and hopefully give you guys value towards that. So I mentioned to him that connection to a body part is more genetic and skill dependent, and the best guys within bodybuilding, in my opinion, genetically, can connect well with all body parts. Like, for example, my calves, like I mentioned previously, my shoulders have always responded very well. I didn't grab good chest connections until probably like this year, actually. This offseason is definitely going to triumph last offseason. But if I told them, if you think about what higher reps do, they burn, and it can be used as a tool to establish connection. Everything I pretty much mentioned just a couple minutes ago. This user asked, how consistent are you? How many days have you missed in 14 years? And I told this person, I love training. I really cannot remember the last time I missed training. Even this week right now that I'm going on this trip, like I'll still hit training because I want to train today, even though today's an off day. But you do need rest. Very counterintuitive to what people think, especially when you're natural, right? So I can't remember the last time I missed training. If I'm on holiday, I'll probably just reduce my frequency, like this week, for example, to kind of manage the recovery demands that travel has sometimes. And I did mention, that's pretty much it. Okay, so this person asked, I'm currently doing push-pull legs, upper lower, pretty much the same split I'm doing, I like to think. He says, I go Monday through Friday, and do cardio abs Saturday. Is 5 days straight too much? I don't really understand this person because he said he does push-pull legs off, upper lower. That's not technically 5 days straight in a row, but he's just asking if this is too much. I never feel super fatigued, and I focus on getting sleep and eating all my macros. And I said, absolutely not too much. CV, like cardiovascular work away from training, is a smart move. Abs recover easy. And I told him that you are your best tool at the end of the day for monitoring recovery. And the fact that this person said they still feel good tells me that they're fine doing, whatever it is they're doing, and they could probably handle more work too if they're feeling really, really good. The time that you don't feel good is probably when you should kind of reassess your split, see if it's too much. But I mean, they clearly said they feel fine, they feel good, they're getting good sleep. So no, that's definitely not too much of a split. With cardio abs in the mix, alongside push-pull legs, upper lower. And this person asked, would you do shoulder press the same day as bench press? And I said, yes, you can. You definitely can do that. This person asked, how often do you train to failure instead of a 1 to 2 RIR? And it says, I've been making slow progress, but often feel I'm training for several sets to failure and wondering if I might have some inefficiency of overexerting and injury risk. And I told this person that every set, at least I tried to, and I said that I would definitely not do this, train to failure, absolute failure, if you are predispositioned to ego lift. Fully exhaust the muscle, stimulate, don't annihilate. Because if you're more predisposition to ego lift, you most likely are going to get injured training to failure with the amount of load that you may have to recruit. We talked about shifts in direction, movement pathing, all that good stuff. And I said that honestly, the gap between 1 and 2 RIR and full failure is so minuscule. Just do what you enjoy. If you enjoy full send your lifts, but some people are perfectly fine taking like 1-2 reps off of actual failure. Excuse me. And I mentioned some things you can actually do to minimize injury risk are prevent rapid shifts in direction, which we already talked about, and avoid machines that torque your joints into uncomfortable positions, which I also asked about. So this person asked a question that I don't really see too commonly, and I think a lot of this is actually perception based. Why do people try to make you feel bad when you work out a lot? I was told 6 days a week is crazy, but the alternative is type 2 diabetes again. I went from 305 to 190, I want 175. And I told this person that honestly, it could, when people, I guess, make you feel bad when lifting, it could be out of jealousy. It could be out of genuine care. Like they might not understand what you're doing, why you're exerting yourself too much. So again, it could be just ignorance, and the attention could actually be good, right? But I told this person I suggest pulling away from negative people. It won't do you any good. And at the end of the day, just hone in on what you enjoy doing. Because at the end of the day, if you're happy, that's all that matters, right? So, bulking advice. Been skinny most of my life with an insanely fast metabolism. And I told this person I'm personally in a very similar boat. I've always never really had the biggest appetite, and I think for myself, it's easier to be in season cutting than it is to bulk. Like I typically approach that point within my bulking where I don't really like eating quick, but the fact that I'm staying pretty lean in my off season right now actually has my appetite increasing. I'm actually kind of hungry right now, so that's cool. But I can get away with not eating. Like I'll just keep busy, keep my mind active, like doing stuff like this, recording this podcast, and I will not think about eating at all. And it'll just typically go away after a while. The appetite cravings. Um, I told this person I'm in a very similar boat, and I told this person what most people already know: low volume, high calorie foods like nuts, liquids, and a mass gainer only if you need to brute force weight gain. But I recommend just pair it with fiber, dates, raisins, bagels, rice, pasta. Get your protein in, but protein is definitely a food that will make you feel full. So also prioritize carbs and fats. You know, don't try to, especially if you're a newer lifter, don't try to evenly like distribute your carbohydrates and fats like a bodybuilder. Your appetite will only work against you if you try to disperse your macronutrient composition in that way. Fats might be a better option since they're higher in calories, but at the same time, don't neglect carbs because you need them when you weight train. And some things that this person probably hasn't tried that I mentioned, make sure you're doing some sort of cardio work to stimulate your appetite and insulin sensitivity too as well. Make sure you're getting steps or movement in between meals so you can digest your food and appetite. When I was younger, when I didn't really have an appetite, I used to just sit at the desk all the time. And that's probably a big reason why I didn't really have an appetite, is because I wouldn't move, right? So movement is one of the biggest players in terms of stimulating your digestive tract. Train hard, as well as avoid stimulants if possible, like caffeine and pre-workout. That's probably also a reason why I didn't have a big appetite. I was a very heavy stim user back in the day, but now I've found that less works much better. More is not always better. And this person asked, why avoid caffeine? I need that after lunch to get me to the gym. Keep in mind, guys, this is the subreddit r/workout. So these are just very like generic questions. I mean, most of us know that caffeine will lower appetite, but if you feel like you need caffeine, it's probably an issue of poor sleep and an under-recovered body, right? Poor sleep and an under-recovered body will also lean into a poor appetite in off-season. And this person asked, after watching Will Tennyson's bodybuilding video, the extremes that you guys go to cut down body fat is insane. And they said, I can't imagine doing that, then deciding to do it for a career, LOL. How difficult is it for you to cut for a comp, and how do you handle your diet after competing? And I said, every body will genetically respond different to low body fat differently. For myself, I didn't really have it bad, to be honest, compared to what other people might have. Obviously, there's multiple factors that go into it aside from just genetics. How well you run your off season prior to starting your prep, building on metabolic capacity and such. If you're starting your prep from a poor position, then you're just going to have a terrible time going into prep. which is sometimes, when people inquire to me for coaching and they're not in the best position, I have to say, like, it's either we extend your season debut, or I can't push you through a prep, because I don't want to pretty much put you through a terrible prep. And most of these people that inquire with me are actually first timers, so I don't want to give them the first impression that bodybuilding is a terrible sport that just has you feeling like crap all the time. It's just unenjoyable. So yeah, but honestly, genetics does have a role to play with that too. After my first season, at least my relationship with food wasn't good at all. I gained 15 pounds in like 3 days. This was back in like 2023. But after this recent season, I executed super well, because I built a very strong relationship with food in my off season. And I had the intention of actually executing my post show well, going into the prep itself. And I think that's something a lot of people neglect. They actually go into their shows just looking forward to that final day where they can just eat whatever they want. I mean, if you go into your show with that, like, oh, the final day I get to eat whatever I want, you're just focused on like the food component after your season, you're going to splurge on food. Versus if you go in with the intention of, I really want to nail post show, I really want to execute what most people can't, what's very difficult, what's arguably more difficult than the actual prep itself, you will execute well, because you're going in with that intention. So intention is so important within not just bodybuilding, but everything in life. So intentions are everything, and going into your season with that intention is important. And I did this obviously to learn from my past season's mistakes, because how can I coach somebody and tell them to do the same thing if I haven't done that myself, right? So now I can gladly say I've done that myself. And what determines well, I guess you could say, well execution is not blowing up in weight in the span of a couple days after your show. A steady rate of gain to a healthy body fat level is what you want. And for everybody, like I mentioned, that's different. Like, it looks different for everybody. For myself, I'm perfectly fine. I feel great being this lean as I am. But for someone else, might be a case of having to put on more body fat to feel the best that they can in terms of libido, hormones, and just performance in the gym too as well. And realistically, a lot of this game is mental. Most bodybuilders who are natural actually spend most of their careers at healthy body fats, or it starts to become unproductive for growth. And not a lot of bodybuilders can handle mentally sitting at higher body fats, right? Which I actually had to do for my last season, which I just kind of rewired my mind to, instead of thinking of aesthetic, I just thought of myself as just performative and strong, right? So there's a lot more mental components to bodybuilding than most people think, in my opinion. But on to the next question. Have you ever had to deal with injury, consistent nagging, or a freak accident? And I said, yes, it sucks, but you've just got to reroute your energy into doing everything you can to get better. Sometimes, having coached a number of people at this point, injuries can either set people back to a spot where they spiral down and actually get into a very depressive state, especially if everything's been going so well. And that happens a lot actually, or they can just do what most people should do, and just, like I mentioned, reroute that energy into something productive. So I should probably get water. I'm gonna pause this for a second, guys. I have not spoken this long in quite some time, so I'm definitely not used to it. But going into this next question. Hi, just curious about your bulk weight and stage ready weight. Also your height. What's your macros proportion look like? Thanks. And I said last off season I pushed to 190. Stage weight is roughly around 153 to 160. Yes, it's that big of a gap depending on how far in the season I am. I'll always have a season opener. I don't believe you should ever compete for just one show. Unless it's your first time, then of course, maybe just do like 1 or 2 shows. But for my last season, I did like 4 shows. Bodybuilding is not cheap. It's very expensive. Going into each show is probably like around 150 to 200 per division entry. So that goes for like open, novice, true novice, each category too. Like, I competed in 2 different divisions in Europe, so that was 2 different entries. It depends, because your last season you should obviously be the most conditioned possible. Hence why I was probably 153 in my last show. And I mentioned the season opener will always be heavier with more softness. Doesn't mean that you can't do well. For my season opener, I was definitely the most soft, but I still won my final pro card, the third pro card in Classic Physique in that show. And this current off season, I was currently 168, now I'm 169. 23 weeks postseason, I don't plan to go over 175 just to keep my health in better check. My insulin sensitivity hasn't always been the best. So, going anything over 175 probably won't be the most productive for myself, as well as for my autoimmune issues too as well. Lowest macros in season were around 2,400 calories. I did 1 hour of cardio work total within the week, split into 2 sessions, so 2 30-minute sessions, 10K steps a week. Now that I'm in my off season, I'm at 3,200 calories with the same amount of cardio, the same amount of steps. Nothing's really trended up. I didn't need to modify expenditure too much for my own prep. For other individuals who are maybe lighter bodybuilders who don't have the metabolic capacity maybe as much, you'll see expenditure trending up, down, left, or right, depending on the peak and through their different shifts and phases, off season into prep. Yes, these will change much, much more. And another person responded to that answer with, crazy how shredded and huge you look on stage at that weight. Thank you if you're watching this. I'm planning on doing my first show, WMF, in September, and I can't wait to see how I look around this weight. Might be holding more fat than I think. And I told them, for your first show, always give yourself more room, just because your perceived stage weight might not actually be what your stage weight is. You might actually be holding on to more body fat than you think, unless you have a coach who has that good coaching eye that works with bodies all the time. And I said that time and perceived stage weight is everything, like I just mentioned right now. And this person asked, what supplements do you use? What do you think actually matters for the average lifter? And I think this is so important, because sometimes people try to just bombard their routines with different kinds of supplementation, thinking it's going to make a huge difference. But guys, the basics are what matters. Supplements are only like the tip of the iceberg. You're not going to get the most progress out of supplementation. But the best supplements, in my opinion, that I answered with are definitely creatine monohydrate. Nothing beats it. Nothing beats it at all. I'll typically have people do around like 5 grams upwards of like 15 if they're like sleep deprived, because there's been new research lately, like in 2025, that shows that extra creatine has a lot of cognitive benefits to them, and especially for sleep deprived people, even not sleep deprived people. So I'll take around like maybe 10 grams on my rest days and 15 grams on my training days, just because you will need more creatine when you're training, right? And what I also recommend, I said what I use that maybe you could benefit from, is vitamin D3, because this day and age we're very tech heavy. Most of us sometimes, if you work an office job, or if you work on the desk a lot like myself, you might not have a lot of sun exposure. Or if you live somewhere that doesn't have a lot of sun, like in the EU, Asia, vitamin D3 helps a ton. 5,000 IUs is what I recommend for most people. If you have a deficiency for some reason, then you could definitely titrate up to like 10,000 IUs. Going into fish oil, because most people don't eat fatty fish. Collagen peptides, multivitamin, those are like the basics. Going into like gut health and digestion, glutamine, super greens. At this point, I'm just answering what I take. So for bad inflammation, I recommend to take this away from the training window, because you typically want inflammation going into your session. The pump in itself is a positive inflammatory effect, so you want positive inflammation within your session. So take anti-inflammatories away from your session if it doesn't stress you out. If it is too stressful to think about, timing your supplements, and just take them all at once. It's not that big of a deal. Turmeric, curcumin, with some bioperine just to help it be a little bit more digestible. Black pepper extract. Vitamin C and quercetin. That's something I just recently started using. This person asked, what are your training methods, heavier or lighter weights? What are your splits? I already covered my split, so PPL off, upper lower off. And I said both Heavier weights, lighter reps, both work. And this person asks, what do you call natty? Great question to cover in this podcast right now. So you say you don't inject testosterone, but what about all the other PEDs like RAD 140, MK677? Those are SARMs. I like to think most people don't take SARMs anymore. They're just like how peptides are super popular right now, guys. SARMs was also very popular, like early 2020s, and it's just going to be another kind of hype fad that dies down eventually over time. I'm sure of it. Um, so what about recovery peptides like BBC 157 and TB 500 for injuries? And is there testing, or is it just like, oh, I'm natty? It's definitely not just like, oh, I'm natty. In my opinion, anything banned by WADA, anything on the banned substance list for any federation, orals are not natty, peptides are not natty. There is testing. Urine is the most common. Blood is the most accurate. Polygraph, in my opinion, is just a joke. It's just for money, in my opinion, to fund the federations. Me personally, I'd rather support the federations just financially without taking the poly, because honestly, like I mentioned, poly is just kind of not really the best in terms of accuracy. But some other great questions to cover during our time together, guys, are, yeah, that seems to be it. A lot of comments for some reason got removed. But yeah, I was expecting this first ever episode to go to like an hour, but it's only been 40 minutes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this first ever episode. I will hopefully catch you in the next one. I'm expecting to do these maybe like every week. That might be reaching, but potentially every month. But if you guys enjoy this podcast, please leave a comment just so I know to keep producing these for you. In the meantime, have an awesome rest of your day, week, guys, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.